You have swatted at them your entire life. You have burned citronella candles, sprayed chemicals on your skin, slept under nets, lit coils, installed zappers, and paid for every product the billion-dollar repellent industry has ever invented. And every single summer they are back. Every single night one finds you in the dark. Every single morning you wake up with evidence that nothing you did was enough. There's a reason for that. Several reasons. And they are more disturbing than you have been told. The mosquito is the deadliest animal in the history of life on Earth. Not the shark, not the crocodile, not any predator that has ever existed in any ecosystem at any point in the fossil record. The mosquito, a creature that weighs 2 milligrams, that you can kill with the tip of one finger. That has nonetheless killed more human beings than every war, every famine, and every natural disaster in recorded history combined. Estimates from researchers studying historical mortality from mosquito-borne disease suggest that mosquitoes may be responsible for half of all human deaths since the species appeared, half of everyone who has ever lived, killed by something you can barely see. And you cannot stop it. Not really, not permanently, not completely. The reasons why form one of the most unsettling stories in the relationship between human civilization and the natural world. Start with the numbers because the numbers establish what you're actually dealing with. There are approximately 3,500 species of mosquito currently identified. Of those, roughly 100 species actively bite humans. Of those 100, 3 genera are responsible for the overwhelming majority of human disease transmission. Anopheles mosquitoes transmit malaria. Aedes mosquitoes transmit dengue fever, Zika virus, yellow fever, and chikungunya. Culex mosquitoes transmit West Nile virus and several forms of encephalitis. These are not minor illnesses. Malaria alone kills between 600,000 and 700,000 people every single year. Dengue fever infects an estimated 400 million people annually across more than 100 countries. West Nile virus has spread across the entire continental United States since its first detection in New York in 1999. These numbers are not historical artifacts from an era before modern medicine. They are current. They are happening right now, and they are, in several critical respects, getting worse. The biology of the mosquito is the first reason stopping it has proven so comprehensively difficult. A female Aedes aegypti mosquito, the primary vector for dengue and Zika, needs approximately 1 teaspoon of water to complete her larval development. 1 teaspoon. A bottle cap, a fold in a tarp, the inside of a discarded tire, a clogged gutter, a forgotten cup left on a patio. The mosquito does not need a pond or a swamp or any body of water that a human being would recognize as a habitat. It needs moisture in any container, in any location, in any corner of any environment where human beings live. This is not a vulnerability that can be addressed by draining obvious water sources. It is a biological strategy so well matched to the human-built environment that the expansion of human civilization has functionally created the ideal mosquito habitat at a global scale. Every city built, every suburb expanded, every refugee camp established, every piece of discarded plastic left in a tropical landscape is potential mosquito breeding habitat. The more densely humans populate an area, the more containers, gutters, tires, construction sites, and water storage vessels exist, and the more breeding sites become available. The mosquito did not adapt to the human environment. The human environment adapted perfectly, accidentally, to the mosquito. The eggs add another dimension that most people do not understand, and that makes elimination essentially impossible, even with sustained intervention. Aedes aegypti eggs can survive in a completely desiccated state for up to a year. They do not need to be in water to remain viable. They can be laid in a container that is dry, wait through months of drought, and hatch within hours when water returns. You can drain every standing water source in an area, maintain that drainage for months, and a single rainstorm can trigger mass hatching from eggs that have been waiting in the walls of containers, in soil, in any crevice where a female deposited them before the dry period began. The eggs are invisible to the naked eye. The containers that hold them are everywhere. The trigger for hatching is rain, which cannot be controlled. The biology is, in practical terms, impossible to interrupt completely. The resistance problem is where the story becomes genuinely alarming. Every major class of insecticide deployed against mosquitoes over the past 70 years has eventually produced resistance in target mosquito populations. DDT, once considered the definitive solution to malaria mosquito control, began generating resistance in Anopheles populations within years of its widespread deployment. Organophosphates followed the same trajectory. Pyrethroids, which became the dominant class of insecticide used in bed nets and indoor spraying programs across malaria endemic regions, are now facing resistance in mosquito populations across sub-Saharan Africa at rates that public health researchers describe as a crisis threatening to undermine decades of progress in malaria control. The mechanism is straightforward and relentless. You expose a mosquito population to an insecticide. The vast majority of the population, which is sensitive to the compound, dies. A small percentage carries genetic variants that confer resistance. Those individuals survive, reproduce, and pass the resistance variants to their offspring. The next generation has a higher frequency of resistant individuals. The generation after that, higher still. Within relatively few generations, you have a population where the majority are resistant. The insecticide that worked stops working. Mosquitoes have short generation times. A female Aedes aegypti goes from egg to reproducing adult in approximately 10 days under optimal conditions. The number of generations per year is high enough that resistance can establish and spread through a population with a speed that leaves human responses consistently behind the curve. And the resistance does not stay in one place. Resistant mosquitoes move. They are transported in vehicles, in shipping containers, in aircraft, in any of the countless ways that global human movement carries small insects across borders and oceans. Aedes aegypti itself is not native to the Americas or Asia. It is an African species that spread globally through the slave trade and colonial shipping routes, establishing itself on every tropical and subtropical coastline on Earth over a period of centuries. The same dispersal mechanisms that move the species globally continue to move resistance genes across populations. You develop a new insecticide. Resistance follows. The cycle repeats, and each iteration starts from a higher baseline of resistance in the global population. The geographic expansion dimension is what is changing fastest right now. Mosquito-borne diseases are not contained to the tropical regions they historically occupied. They are moving. The northern range limits of Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, the two primary dengue vectors, are shifting as temperature and precipitation patterns change. Areas that were historically too cold to support year-round mosquito populations are becoming seasonally suitable. Southern Europe has experienced locally transmitted dengue cases in countries including France, Spain, and Croatia within the last decade. These are not imported cases from travelers. They are cases transmitted locally by mosquitoes that have established breeding populations in regions where dengue was previously unknown. The United States has documented locally transmitted dengue in Florida and Texas with increasing regularity. Malaria, which was eliminated from the continental United States in the early 1950s, has shown locally transmitted cases in Florida and Texas in recent years for the first time in decades. These are not large outbreaks, they are small clusters, but they are indicators of a directional change in where the mosquitoes' range ends and where human populations without pre-existing immunity or public health infrastructure tuned to these diseases begin. The mathematical models that epidemiologists use to project future mosquito range under different temperature scenarios are consistent across research groups and across modeling approaches. The range expands. The transmission season lengthens in temperate zones. The altitude ceiling for mosquito survival rises in mountainous regions, exposing highland populations that previously had no exposure to malaria or dengue. The trajectory runs in one direction. The genetic intervention approaches represent the most ambitious attempt in history to address the mosquito problem at a biological rather than chemical level. Two broad strategies have advanced to field trial stage. The first involves releasing male mosquitoes carrying a gene that causes their offspring to die before reaching reproductive maturity. The second involves using the bacterium Wolbachia, which reduces mosquito competence for certain viruses, spreading it through wild populations by releasing Wolbachia-infected mosquitoes. Both approaches have shown promising results in contained trials. Both face limitations that researchers are candid about. The gene drive approach requires sustained large-scale releases to maintain suppression because the self-limiting genetic construct does not spread on its own. Stop the releases and the wild population recovers. The Wolbachia approach has shown real-world efficacy in reducing dengue transmission in trial cities in Australia, Indonesia, and Colombia. But its effectiveness varies by mosquito species, by Wolbachia strain, and by local ecological conditions. And it addresses dengue while having limited effect on malaria transmission, which is caused by a parasite rather than a virus and requires a different biological intervention entirely. The vaccine situation for mosquito-borne diseases reflects the same pattern of partial progress and persistent limitation. A malaria vaccine was approved by the World Health Organization and began rollout in sub-Saharan African countries in 2021. Its efficacy in clinical trials, at approximately 30% reduction in severe malaria cases in children under 5, represents a genuine achievement in a field where malaria vaccine development defeated researchers for decades. But 30% efficacy against a disease that kills 600,000 people per year still leaves most of the disease burden in place. There is no dengue vaccine with the coverage and efficacy profile that would constitute a public health solution at scale. There is no Zika vaccine. There is no West Nile vaccine. The disease burden continues. The range expands. The resistance accumulates. The interventions remain partial. The last dimension that makes the mosquito impossible to stop is the one that operates above the level of biology and below the level of political will. It is the infrastructure gap between where mosquito-borne disease kills people and where the resources to address it are concentrated. Malaria kills 600,000 people per year, nearly all of them in sub-Saharan Africa, and a disproportionate number of those deaths are children under 5. The countries where malaria kills the most people are not the countries with the research capacity, pharmaceutical infrastructure, or public health systems to mount the response the disease requires. The countries with that capacity are the ones where malaria was eliminated decades ago, and where the disease has receded from political consciousness and funding priority. The mosquito has always been most lethal at the intersection of biology and inequality. It kills the people who live in the places where the heat and the water and the poverty create the conditions it needs, while the solutions are developed in air-conditioned laboratories in cities where window screens and municipal drainage have made the mosquito a summer nuisance rather than a seasonal death sentence. Every summer night, somewhere in your house, one finds you in the dark. You wake up itching and you swat at it and you go back to sleep. That is the mosquito you know, the minor irritant, the background annoyance of warm weather. The mosquito that has reshaped human civilization, altered the outcomes of wars, depopulated regions, and killed more people than anything else that has ever lived on this planet is the same animal. Same species, same biology, same 2 milligrams of adaptive perfection. You cannot stop it because it was never trying to be stopped. It was simply trying to feed, and in 200 million years of trying, it has never once failed to find a way.